My parents screamed, "Take your brat and get out," as they shoved us into a snowstorm at midnight. I wrapped my daughter in my coat and kept walking. 4 hours later, a knock hit their door. When they opened it and saw who arrived, they started screaming. They screamed it like it was nothing. "Take your brat and get out." Then the door slammed behind us and the lock clicked. That was it. No bags, no blankets, not even Ellie's shoes. Just the sound of my mother shouting through the door about how ungrateful I was, and my father yelling about how I'd regret it when I was on the street. The snow was already piling up on the porch when I picked Ellie up and wrapped my coat around her. She was still half asleep, confused, whispering that she was cold and asking if we were going to the store. I didn't say a word. My mouth was dry and I couldn't feel my hands. I started walking, not because I knew where to go but because I didn't have anywhere to stop. The streets were empty. No cars, no lights in the windows, just the crunch of my boots and the wind slapping my face. Every few blocks I had to stop and rewrap my coat tighter around Ellie. Her little feet were bare. I kept pressing her hands between mine to keep her awake. She was 4. And we were alone in a snowstorm at midnight because I said no. That's all it was. No, I said I couldn't give my dad $10,000 to buy a new car. He already had one. It worked fine. But he wanted something newer. Something flashier. Because apparently the whole town was going to think less of him if he didn't upgrade. He told me I owed it to him. That since I was living under his roof, eating his food, I should be willing to pay up when he asked. And when I reminded him I paid for everything I could, groceries, utilities, half the rent, he said it didn't count because I was still a burden. A widow with a kid. A stain on their perfect life. He didn't ask for the money. He demanded it. Like I was just his bank account with a pulse. When I refused, he snapped. Said I was using Ellie to get sympathy. Said the only reason I had any money was because of what my husband left me. My mother joined in, of course. He always did. She said I was disrespectful. That they took me in when nobody else wanted me. That I'd end up on the street if I kept acting like I was better than them. I guess they wanted to prove their point. So they threw us out. No warning. Just get out. At midnight. In a snowstorm. The town was mostly dark. Even gas stations were closed. I walked past the same intersections over and over, trying to think if there was anyone I could call. I had no friends left here. Most of them drifted away after my husband died. And the ones who didn't were barely hanging on themselves. By the 3rd hour, I thought seriously about knocking on a stranger's door. I had Ellie curled up against my chest, her fingers stiff. My coat wasn't even thick enough. I kept walking because stopping meant accepting we were stuck, and I wasn't ready to do that. At around 4 a.m., I ended up outside a house I hadn't been to in over a year. It was quiet. The porch light was off. I stood there for a minute trying to decide if I could really knock. I had any right to. But I did. Once. Twice. The light came on. The door opened slowly. I didn't say anything. The look on their faces, shock, confusion, and something else. Something I couldn't name at first. It was my husband's parents. Marie and Thomas. They hadn't seen me since the funeral. We didn't talk after that. My parents made sure of it. Said they were trying to control me. Said they wanted my husband's life insurance and were trying to sink their claws into Ellie. All lies. But I believed them at the time. I believed a lot of things I shouldn't have. They didn't ask questions. They just stepped aside, pulled us in, shut the door. Marie took Ellie out of my arms and wrapped her in a thick blanket. Thomas went straight to the kitchen to boil water for tea. Like it was automatic. Like we were still family. That night changed everything. I wasn't just someone who got kicked out by her parents anymore. I was someone who had nothing left to lose. And when you have nothing left to lose, you start seeing the truth really clearly. I saw how my parents had used me. I saw how they saw Ellie as leverage. And I saw what I needed to do. They thought they could scare me into silence. Into crawling back and apologizing. They had no idea who I'd just gone to. Or what I was about to do. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table in Marie and Thomas's house, wrapped in one of their oversized sweaters, watching Ellie snore softly on the couch with 3 blankets over her. I kept staring at my hands, half expecting them to start shaking. But they never did. Marie brought me hot tea without asking anything. She didn't push, didn't prod, didn't tell me she was sorry. She just sat across from me and waited. It wasn't until the sun started to rise that I told her everything. Not just about the night before. I told her about the last 9 months. About how my parents had started demanding money the day after the funeral. About how my dad said I needed to contribute if I was going to be living in his house with his granddaughter. About how they started suggesting I should sign some of the money over to them for family expenses. At first it was little things. Pay for repairs, groceries, medical bills. Then they wanted me to give them control over the rest. My dad claimed he'd invest it, grow it, make sure Ellie had enough for college. But when I asked for details, he got angry. Told me I was accusing him of stealing. Said I was ungrateful for all they'd done. The fights got worse after that. But I stayed. I thought I had no one else. Until that night. I sat at the table and looked at Marie, and I asked her the one question that had been stuck in my throat for months. Did she know what really happened with the store? Her eyes locked on mine and I saw it. Just a flicker. Then she asked me what I meant. Before my parents opened the small home goods store in town years ago, they had a silent partner. My husband told me about it once before we got married. He said there was shady paperwork and some weird financial back and forth that didn't make sense. He always suspected something illegal went down, but he didn't have proof, and back then, it didn't seem worth stirring up. I never looked into it after he died. But now, with nothing left, I remembered every word of that conversation. Every little thing I had brushed off at the time. Marie nodded slowly. Then she got up and disappeared into the garage. He came back with a box. Inside were files, contracts, notes, bank statements, copies of emails. She said Thomas had been collecting them for years just in case. Because they knew my parents had done something shady, something that could collapse the whole business if it came out. But they never told anyone because they didn't want to drag me through it. Now they weren't going to hold back. That morning I went to the sheriff's office and filed the report. I didn't hesitate. I gave them everything. The files. The names. The dates. The bank account numbers. The fraud went back almost a decade. Fake invoices. Duplicate loans. Money under different names. And enough forged signatures to put someone behind bars for a long time. The officer looked over the documents and said it might take a few weeks to build the case. I nodded and thanked him. Then I walked out and made the call I never thought I'd make. Called my parents. I wanted them to know. I wanted them to hear it from me. I told my father I'd filed the report. That I gave the police everything. That I knew what he and my mother had done with the business and I wasn't going to protect them anymore. There was silence on the other end. Then he laughed. Not because it was funny, because he thought I was bluffing. He said I'd regret it. That I didn't know what I was doing. That if I didn't drop the case, he'd call child services and tell them I was unstable, homeless, unfit to be a mother. He said he could make a call and Ellie would be gone by the end of the day. Then he hung up. I sat there for a full minute before I realized I wasn't scared. For the first time in a long time I felt something else. I felt ready. The first call came that afternoon. A blocked number. I let it go to voicemail, but they didn't leave one. The second call came 15 minutes later. Then a text. You think you've won? You don't know what we're capable of. I didn't reply. I turned off my phone and handed it to Thomas. He took it without saying a word and set it on the counter. A few minutes later he was making phone calls of his own. By that evening Marie and Thomas had a lawyer lined up for me. Not just any lawyer. Someone who knew my husband's estate, someone who could handle whatever was about to come down. Apparently, this lawyer had suspected for years that something was off with my parents but never had a reason to push. Now he did. The next day it got worse. Someone tried to report me to Child Protective Services. They said I was homeless, mentally unstable, and dragging my daughter from place to place. That she didn't have a bed. That I was exposing her to dangerous people. They even threw in a claim that I was drinking in front of her. It didn't take long to figure out who made the call. When the social worker showed up, I was ready. Marie opened the door and welcomed her inside like it was routine. Ellie was clean, smiling, warm, fed. Her bed was set up in a guest room with all her toys. The worker stayed for 20 minutes and left with a smile. Later that night I got another message. If we go down, you go down too. We'll ruin you. So I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The detective from the sheriff's office called me 2 days later. He said they'd found records of loan applications signed under names that didn't exist. One of them was mine. Apparently, my parents had used my identity years ago without telling me. They'd been funneling money through accounts in my name since before I was even married. That was the moment things turned. The detective said now the case wasn't just about business fraud. It was identity theft too. The look on Marie's face when I told her said everything. Thomas leaned back in his chair and shook his head. Neither of them looked surprised. They'd warned me before. I just hadn't wanted to believe them. I spent the next week working with the lawyer, signing affidavits, handing over every scrap of evidence I could remember. Texts, receipts, bank screenshots, old emails. I stayed quiet, stayed low. But my parents didn't. They started turning people against me. Old neighbors, family, friends. One of my cousins messaged me to say my dad told everyone I'd stolen money from them and made up the fraud story to cover it up. Another relative tried to confront me in public, yelling about how I was tearing the family apart. I didn't even stop walking. Meanwhile, the investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Because once the police started digging, they found a lot more than just fraud. There was a second business, one my parents had never told anyone about, and it was under my name. When the detective told me they found a second business registered under my name, I didn't understand at first. I thought maybe he meant a credit card or some kind of paperwork mistake. But no, this was real. A registered LLC in my name with tax documents, payroll reports, a full paper trail. I had never seen it. Never signed a thing. Never heard of it. They called it A&E Wholesale Supplies. The K was for Ariana. My name. The E wasn't hard to guess, it was Ellie. It looked like a regular small supply company. On paper. But there were no employees, no shipments, no actual work being done. The business existed only on paper. But the money was real. According to the documents, this fake company had received over $80,000 in government grants and small business loans over the past 2 years. All of it processed through applications filled with lies. Forged income, fake expenses, and a business address that turned out to be an empty storefront across town that had been abandoned for years. They used my name. They used my daughter's name. They stole my signature off old bank forms, copied it, and signed loan agreements in my handwriting. The detective said they were building a strong case. This was federal now. Wire fraud, tax fraud, identity theft, maybe more. That night, I sat on the back porch at Marie and Thomas's house and just stared at the trees behind their yard. I didn't cry. Not even then. I was past that. What I felt wasn't grief anymore. It was disgust. And something else underneath that, slowly rising. Rage. All those nights I stayed silent while they treated me like I owed them everything. All the guilt they threw at me. The shame. The lies about my husband's parents. The manipulation. The control. And now this. They hadn't just stolen from the government. They'd stolen my name, my child's name, my future. Marie came out and sat next to me. She didn't say much. Just told me they were behind me. That Ellie was safe now. That I wasn't alone. The next morning, the police executed a search warrant. They raided my parents' house at 6:15 a.m. A neighbor who still liked me messaged me an hour later with a photo. My dad in a robe on the porch, yelling at the officers, my mom crying in the background while they hauled out boxes of documents. That afternoon, the sheriff called again. They'd found bank statements, notebooks with scribbled account numbers, even a burner phone with texts between my dad and someone he'd been working with to funnel the fake loan money. It was open and shut. They were arrested 2 days later. Fraud, forgery, grand larceny, wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion. The list just kept growing. But it didn't end there. Before they were taken in, my father left me one final voicemail. His voice was calm. Too calm. He said if I thought it was over, I was wrong. That someone else knew everything. That if I didn't drop the case, he'd make sure I paid for this. Even if he had to do it from prison. I listened to the voicemail twice. Then 3 more times just to be sure I wasn't imagining the way he said it. The calm tone. The threat buried under fake concern. Someone else knew everything. I didn't know what that meant, at least not at first. I thought maybe he was bluffing. Or trying to scare me into backing off before the court date. But something about the way he said it stuck with me like a splinter. That same evening, the lawyer called. He'd gotten a heads up from the D. There was a new problem. Turns out, one of the loan applications tied to the fake business had been co-signed. Not just forged, co-signed. Which meant someone else had willingly helped them submit it. And that person was still out there. The name wasn't immediately recognizable to me, but when they showed me a photo, my stomach dropped. It was Darren, my cousin. We'd grown up together. Spent summers riding bikes, shared birthdays, sleepovers. But we hadn't talked in years. And now I understood why. Darren had always been close with my dad. After high school, he dropped out of community college and started working in sales, which no one ever really questioned. It turned out that for the last 3 years he'd been helping my parents launder money through fake invoices and ghost companies, including the one in my name. He wasn't just involved, he was the architect behind it. The tech-savvy one. The guy who knew how to file digital applications and wipe tracks. That's why my dad said it wasn't over. The police tried to bring Darren in for questioning, but he didn't show up. His house was empty. No one had seen him for 2 days. His phone was off. His car was gone. He ran. Marie kept the doors locked that night. Thomas stayed up until 2 a.m. just watching the front window. And I didn't sleep at all. Not because I was scared, but because I was furious. They had dragged me and my daughter into a web of crimes, lies, and manipulation. They tried to ruin my name. They threatened to have my daughter taken from me. And now they were trying to disappear and pin the rest on me if things went south. But they were too late. The lawyer filed for full control of all assets left behind in Ellie's name. We found out my parents had been trying to quietly sell off some things before the arrest. Old property, stock shares, even my grandmother's house. But the accounts had already been frozen. They weren't getting out of this. Not with a lawyer, not with a deal. And Darren wasn't as smart as he thought either. He used one of my husband's old banking connections to route money, and the system flagged it. That's how they tracked him. He was 3 states away, hiding in some budget motel off a highway. They caught him 2 weeks after the arrest. He didn't say a word when they brought him in. But he didn't have to. His laptop did all the talking. Emails, screenshots, PDF contracts, drafts of every fake business plan. The entire history of their scheme laid out in folders with names like Project Cleanup and Safe Copy. The DA called me personally. Said it was one of the most well-documented fraud cases they'd ever seen. And every piece of it came back to my parents. But they still hadn't faced me. Not directly. That part was coming next. The trial. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Or maybe it just felt that way because of who was sitting across from me. My parents didn't look like themselves anymore. My dad's hair had gone completely gray in a matter of months. My mother had lost weight. Neither of them looked at me when I entered. Not once. They were facing over a dozen charges by then. The prosecution had so much evidence they didn't even bother dramatizing it. Just laid it out piece by piece. False applications, bank records, forged signatures, surveillance footage of Darren accessing mailboxes not registered in his name. And me. They asked me to testify. I told them everything. How my parents kicked us out. How they used my name for a fake business. How they filed for loans with my information without my knowledge. How they tried to silence me, threaten me, turn my own family against me. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth. My lawyer said later that it was the calmness that broke the jury. They saw it for what it was, not revenge. Just survival. Darren took a deal and testified against them. His statement was brutal. He gave up every detail, even some I didn't know. How my dad coached him on how to mimic my signature. How my mother sat with him while he created fake payroll lists. How they laughed about it being free money. The trial lasted 6 days. The verdict took less than 4 hours. Guilty. On every single count. They were sentenced the following week. 10 years each. Eligible for parole in 6. I thought I'd feel something when the judge read it. Relief. Vindication. Maybe even satisfaction. But all I felt was done. Like a rope around my chest had finally gone slack. Afterward, as I was walking out, someone called my name. I turned, and for the first time in nearly a year, my father was looking straight at me. No handcuffs. Just standing there waiting to be taken away. He didn't yell. Didn't beg. Just said quietly that I was no daughter of his. I told him he was right. Then I walked away. We moved 2 weeks later. Marie and Thomas helped me find a small house outside the city. Nothing big. Just a little place with space for Ellie to run around and paint on the walls like she always wanted to. We planted flowers in the front. Got a cat. I started working again, part-time at first, then more. Ellie still asks about them sometimes. I don't lie. I just tell her the truth in pieces she can understand. That some people choose money over family. That not everyone deserves a second chance. That we're safe now. A few months later, late one night, there was a knock at the door. I opened it and found an envelope on the porch. No one in sight. Just a plain white envelope with my name on it in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a photo of my parents, in prison jumpsuits, taken from a distance like it was printed off a news report. And one sentence written in shaky, slanted ink. You finished what he started. No signature. I stood there for a long time holding it, thinking about my husband, about how he always suspected something, how he tried to warn me, and how in the end it wasn't revenge. It was justice. For me, for Ellie, and for him.